Welcome back for another episode of the Kickstarter Weekly, everyone. I'm actually going to change the format a little bit starting with this video. I'm not going to talk about it at the top, but if you want to hear more about it, I will be talking about what I did and why I did it during the What's Coming section. And I will also be talking about another change I may make, probably around the switch from 2021 to 2022. And I'll be talking about that in the What's Coming section as well, and hopefully getting your feedback. But without any further ado, let's start this week's video with the 2 played games I had this week. So I played Brew, or rather I played half a game of Brew. It was after a longer game that I will talk about next. But that game ran long enough that we didn't really have time to do much else. So we tried to get in a quick game of Brew, and while Brew is a quick game, it wasn't quick enough. But I think that I played it enough to talk about it a little bit and sort of my initial impressions. So Brew is a dice drafting and area control game. It's published by Pandasaurus Games. Gameplay takes place over 4 rounds, and each round, each player is going to roll 4 of their dice for their specific character, as well as 2 elemental dice. Now they can either place them on one of 3 forests that have come out for that round, and when they do that, they will get some presents there for area control. Depending on what spot they take, they may also be able to get some resources. Or they can use that die to take an action on the main board. Making things a little bit more complicated and interesting is the fact that the main board flips over every round. So in the first and third rounds, you'll be playing on the day side of the main board. And in the second and the fourth rounds, you'll be playing on the night side of the main board. And the actions on each side of the board are somewhat different. So the actions that you can take will change each round. Now, when players use their dice to take a spot on the action board or on the forests, they will be using the face of that die, and it has to match what they're triggering. If they use the elemental dice, those are going to have various rule breakers. So if you're using the water die, you will get 3 of a resource instead of just 1. So you'll always get +2 of the resource. If you use the fire die, you can go on top of someone else's die and you sort of negate their presence there. So that plays towards the area control. Finally, if you use the wind die, you'll be able to take back a die that you placed previously. So you'll be able to take the action in full, and then you'll retrieve the die that you're placing it over, and then you'll have an extra turn that round. Now, with those resources that they're allocating, players are buying potions over the course of the game. And every round, in addition to that die placement, they can buy 1 potion and they can drink 1 potion. And those potions will have usually effects on the dice in some way that are advantageous to the player. So sometimes you're turning a die into a different die that's better for you. Sometimes you're re-rolling your dice. Maybe you don't like the dice that you have, things like that. And then there are also animal cards in the game, and if players go to a dice placement location that allows them to train an animal, they can take one of the 4 animals that is face up in the animal market, and they'll put it next to their board, their character card. And those animals will have ongoing abilities that will help you throughout the end of the game. Making things a bit more interesting is the fact that there are certain colors to the animal cards and there are certain colors to the forest cards. So at the end of every round, people will be winning the forest cards based on area majority. Now, once they have some forest cards, they can then retire the animals that they've been training. Why would they want to do that? Well, you can only have 3 active animals at any one time. So at a certain point in the game, some of the animal cards that you have, their special abilities may not really do much for you anymore. And you may want to retire an animal so that you can get a new one. When you retire an animal, you're going to choose a forest that you've already won to place that animal into. The colors need to match. So you need to kind of be thinking about the various colors of the animals and the forests when you're acquiring them. But once you flip an animal into a forest, then at the end of the game, that animal will score 3 points instead of 1 point. The forest cards will also score you victory points at the end of the game, and where the animals will either score you 1 point or 3 points, depending on if you've put it in a forest. The forest cards alone have a variable victory point amount. They say it on it so that you'll know what you are sort of bidding for when you're taking those area control locations throughout the round. But based on my experience, it looks like the forests range from maybe 3, 4, 5 points to 7, 8, 9. So kind of somewhere in there. And then at the end of the game, after 4 rounds, after people have taken all of their various dice placement actions and the game ends, they will score points for those forests, for the animals in the forests, and any little victory point markers that they've accumulated throughout the game for various little bonus actions. Like maybe you had an animal that allowed you to score a victory point every time you trained a new animal, something like that. I'm always looking for lighter games to have in my collection, games that I can entice newer gamers with, or games that I can pull out if we don't have time for a big meaty Euro at the beginning or the end of a game night. And that was the main reason that I got Brew. I also thought the art looked really cool, and I was intrigued by the gameplay. Now, I do plan on doing a first impressions video, I think, for this. So my score may change by the time I do that. Certainly, I've only played a half a game right now, so take this for what it's worth. But I think as of right now, my score for the game will probably be about a 6.5 to a 7. That's not necessarily a bad thing. This just really isn't my game. I mean, I enjoyed it, and I think I will enjoy it more when playing, and there certainly are tactical choices to be made. But I think at the end of the day, it's just a little bit light for me. I feel like the gameplay is not heavy enough really for me, and the choices just weren't compelling enough. But keep in mind, I tend to gravitate towards heavier games. So it's very, very likely that someone who likes this kind of game may give it a couple point score higher than I did. So just keep that in mind. I do think it's a solid game. I do think it's a very enjoyable game. I think it has great art and it has nice components and everything about the game is good. It just really is a case of whether or not it appeals to you, maybe more than it does to me. But for people who like shorter games that aren't too complex, that still have some good choices to be made in them, and also don't mind a certain amount of take that, because there are things that you will be doing that will be punishing towards your opponent or opponents. And that includes, using that fire die to go over an opponent's dice and kind of negate them from the area control placement. So I think for me, it's going to sit comfortably around the 6.5 to 7 range. I do plan on keeping this one for a while and bringing it out to various game groups when we have a smaller amount of time to play something fast and tight. And for people who like this kind of game, I think you will really like this one. It is really, really good for what it is. I also played Unsettled, which is the big game that just delivered from Orange Nebula, and they are the same publisher that did Vindication. Now, I have everything for Vindication. I love Vindication. It's essentially a cube pushing game with theme that some people consider disposable. But I think the production level of Vindication, the components, everything about it is just so well done. And whether or not you think it's thematic or it's a little bit more maybe towards the abstract, I think the collection of gameplay mechanisms in Vindication is just a real winning combination. It's not reinventing the wheel, but it's presenting it in a new way with lots of flair and shine to it. And I really do like Vindication. So I was looking forward to Unsettled, which is their new game, and it didn't really disappoint for me. In fact, I think they've done such a good job on the production level that I have to sort of put them in the same category as publishers like Mind Clash and Chip Theory Games, and to some degree, Eagle Gryphon Games, who I think does their best work when they're doing the Vital Lacerda Deluxe games. They also did a really good deluxe version of Rococo. So Orange Nebula has just made an amazing game. Now, if you don't know what the game is, it's essentially a survival cooperative game, kind of like Pandemic. But what makes it different is that there are up to 6 different planet boxes in Unsettled. So if you just did the minimum pledge, or if you get this thing at retail, you will get 2 planet boxes included in that base game box. Now, each planet box has 3 different missions, and a mission is essentially a collection of 8 cards that includes a number of tasks. So they all find your crew of spaceship travelers who have crash landed on an alien planet, and you have to do various things to either explore and or escape the planet. I mean, eventually you have to leave no matter what. So what that means is for each planet box, you essentially have 3 different variants of game. And each game is going to have objectives that are so different that it's not even about, putting tiles in a different order or cards in a different order. It will literally change the mechanisms of gameplay. And you've got that for each planet. So it really is 3 different games in one for each planet. Now, if you backed everything in the Kickstarter, or if all of this is available at retail, of that I'm not sure. If it is, you'll probably have to buy the other planets separately. But there were a total of 6 different planets. So 3 different tasks per planet box times 6 different planet boxes means you essentially have 18 different games in one. And yes, they have some similarities, and I'm sure as you play them more and more, you'll see some overlap in the kinds of things that they're doing. But they really are 18 different games. Now, what that means is that I don't think this game is going to get old anytime soon, because every time you play the same task, like if you wanted to go and play that task again, it will be different every time. So you could theoretically just take one planet box and one task and play that over and over and over, and that would kind of be the equivalent of if you owned Pandemic, right? I mean, you're playing the same thing over and over in a Pandemic base game, right? This is 18 of those. I think if you wanted to make it into a campaign, it's not a campaign game, but if you wanted to make it into a campaign and say, okay, we're going to take the same group of people, we're going to go to the first planet, Winora, we're going to go and we're going to do task 1. And you could just keep playing that until you do it successfully. It's not an easy game, so chances are you're going to fail more than you succeed. But let's say you play it a few times, you eventually succeed, and so you go on to the next task for that planet, and you play that a couple times until you succeed it. Rinse and repeat. By the time you've finished all 6 planets, all 18 tasks, that first one's going to seem really fresh again. Because again, it's not the same task every time you play. There will be still differences, the way tiles come out, cards, all that. That will be different even when you're doing the same task. And that can change the gameplay a lot. And the choices that individual players make during the game are going to change the game. So there is a lot of variability and replayability in this game. And because these planet boxes are relatively small, they're about this big. 2 of them come inside the base game. I don't know if you could fit all 6 in the base game. Maybe not with the boxes, but there's no reason you kind of can't swap them in and out depending on what planet boxes you want to take to a game day. There's no reason that Orange Nebula can't just produce more planet boxes in the future, and every planet box they do is going to give you so much more game. So not only is this a really, really well-produced version, let's say, of Pandemic that has 18 different variants, games, really, there is an unlimited potential for more content and more variations, more planets. And every planet is different, too, so it changes things a lot. The first planet that we played is a spore planet, and they actually encourage you to get infected and become a fungal host. And once you are, there will be ways that you can interact with various things around the tiles that will benefit you. But every single planet is going to have very, very different mechanisms and gameplay tweaks that will really change not only the gameplay, but the feel of the environment and the feeling of the planet. Now, I will say right from the get-go that this game is sitting around the number 3 slot for my best favorite game of 2021. I still haven't played everything yet, so that may switch around a little bit, but right now it's at number 3. And everything that I've talked about goes into that, including the components, the variability of gameplay. It is just an amazing gameplay experience that everyone should have at least once if they can, if they don't even own it. Try to find it, play it. It's great. I will say the one problem I think with Unsettled is the rulebook. And Vindication was a bit of a problem as well. I think Orange Nebula likes to write rulebooks that kind of appeal to the reader. They definitely have a great sense of humor, kind of a cheeky sense of humor, and that is present throughout the game in the cards and all of the writing, and it's really, really welcome. It is sharp, intelligent writing. It is cheeky. It is funny. It kind of makes light of the survival situation, but not in a way that's annoying or frustrating to the players, in a way that is, funny and engaging and has some levity. It's a dark sense of humor, but it's very welcome and it's very funny. But the problem is, I think, that the rule book is almost written to be a good read, and it's not written very well to communicate information. And so on our first play, even though I'd read the rule book a couple times, and the rule book for Unsettled is also written in a way that they really want you to kind of learn from the doing. So there is encouragement in the rule book to just jump into the game and learn as you play. It's a difficult proposition, though. It is a bit of a slog. We were constantly referencing the rule book. There's even a section in the rule book that says, don't bother with this. It's too confusing. There's too much information here. Do not consult this until you need to. And then when you do, you can consult it for individual things. But if you try to read it all the way through, it's just going to be a huge blast of information that you don't need coming at you. So what we noticed is that when we did go to that section, oftentimes the information that we thought would be there, because this is the place that's supposed to have the, difficult sort of unnecessary information that you need for figuring out the specifics of rules, most of the time what we were looking for or needed wasn't there either. And so we were having to go online and kind of hunt around and find quotes from Tom Matson to kind of put certain questions to rest. They already need a revised rulebook just right out of the gate. So that's something to be aware of. That said, we did figure everything out, at the end of the day. We did finish the game. We lost. We got close. We got within, I think, 1 to 2 tasks of finishing. We actually needed to complete the tail end of a task. We had accumulated a certain amount of resources. We basically needed to take those resources somewhere, hit a button, go to the ship. That little ending thing we were not able to get done. So my point with all of that is that I think that my experience with the game is not as good as it normally would be now that I know the game and I can sort of help teach it to other people. And whatever the game throws at me at this point, I'm going to have a general understanding of the various mechanics and I can roll with it, I think. So right now, my score for Unsettled after one play is sitting at about a 9.0 out of 10. I'm not sure where that's going to go in subsequent plays. I do plan on doing a first impressions video for this game. It probably won't come out next week because next week is Thanksgiving week and I have a lot of plans. I don't think I'll be able to get that produced next week, but it's very, very likely, almost guaranteed, that that video will be published in 2 weeks. And I think at that time, my 9.0 score, if it goes anywhere, will probably go up. So that's how much I like the game. I really love it. It's definitely going to be in my top 5 of 2021. I think even if some other really great games slide up in there, I don't see Unsettled losing more than, let's say, 2 spots. So I can't see it not being in my top 5 of 2021. Right now it's at number 3. It's sitting behind Sleeping Gods at number 1 and Kanban EV at number 2. And then behind it, I think, is Dice Throne Adventures at number 4, Imperium Classics and Legends at number 5, and Coffee Traders at number 6. So that's what my top 6 is looking like right now. But Unsettled was amazing. Love it. If you are into exploration and, more importantly, survival games, because everyone does have to work together, you are not just exploring. There is a timer on everything, and you will die a lot. But if you like those kinds of games, this is a winner. One quick note, there are games like Time Stories or The Seventh Continent, and those games are essentially a puzzle. And every time you play those games, it's scripted, so it's going to be the same. And those games are usually about replaying something until you beat it. Now, with Unsettled, you may need to replay it until you beat it if you want to beat it. but it isn't scripted. It's not going to be the same experience every time. It will be randomized. It will change with every game. Those are the two games I played this week. I do have a lot of games I'm going to be playing over the next week. I actually have a game day on Saturday, a game day on Sunday, big game days where we're going to be playing multiple games, and I may be playing some more games over Thanksgiving. But I definitely will be talking about a lot more games next week in next week's Kickstarter Weekly. And if I only get one video out next week during Thanksgiving week, I will be getting a Kickstarter Weekly out. It just may come out late around the end of next weekend, Thanksgiving weekend. But it looks like there will be a lot of Kickstarter campaigns that I'll be talking about in that video, so be looking for it. But we need to talk about this week. So this week's Kickstarter Weekly is for the games that will be funding between November 22nd and November 28th. And there are only 2 games that I'm going to be talking to you about today. I think there just aren't as many games being put on Kickstarter right now. There's a global shipping crisis that's still ongoing, but more importantly, we're getting into the holidays. And I think a lot of publishers don't want to be running a campaign through the holidays. So there are less Kickstarters I'll be talking about this week. Next week, there's actually a bunch, but I'm anticipating that after that, maybe for the last month of the year in December, there may be less Kickstarters each week in these videos. We'll see. We'll see how it all works out. I just know that in the month of November, there have been a fraction of the Kickstarters that I normally would be talking to you about. I note everything as it appears. I deliberate over what I'm going to be talking about. And I know that there are very few campaigns running in November that I really want to be talking about. So we'll see how that goes into December. But the first game that I do want to talk about today is MonsDRAWsity, Unusual Suspects. It's going to fund on Tuesday, November 23rd. So if you have a lot of Thanksgiving stuff happening, just make sure to kind of be aware these things don't pass you by. Tuesday, November 23rd, 2 days before Thanksgiving. They had a minimum required funding goal for this game of $15,000. They are currently sitting at $50,000, which is under 3.5 times that minimum required funding goal. Now, MonsDRAWsity Unusual Suspects is a standalone expansion for MonsDRAWsity. So you can integrate it with the base game, but you do not need to have the base game to play this game. It stands alone. It plays 3 to 8 players. Games range from about 20 to 120 minutes. It's really going to depend on how many players you have. So a 3-player game is not going to nearly run as long as an 8-player game, which, that should be common sense, right? The complexity on MonsDRAWsity Unusual Suspects is light, and we're going to set the risk on this campaign at medium-low. Now, what is it? Well, it is a drawing game and it is a party game. And so generally how MonsDRAWsity works is players will get cards, they'll choose a card. It's like a lot of other games like this, even like Dixit, where someone's gonna get their card. In this case, it's a drawing game. So one player will get this card for the round. They'll have about 20 seconds to look at the card and study the card, then they'll put it down, and then they'll describe the card to the other players and they'll answer questions about it without being able to look back at the card. And then the other players will all try to draw what they think is being described. When they're done, everyone will see what was being drawn, and then players will vote on who drew it best, with the caveat that they cannot vote for their own card. Players will get 1 point for everybody that picks their drawing, and the person who originally described the card will also get a point to assign to whoever they think drew it best. And then someone will win the round. Rinse and repeat, and eventually the game ends. Whoever has the most points wins. So it's a very familiar setup. It's not that different from Dixit, where people are trying to choose cards based on a word, or even a game like Cards Against Humanity, where people are trying to come up with the best punchline. In this game, they're just trying to draw something. But it's kind of kooky and crazy monsters and stuff like that, so you don't need to be the best drawer to play this game. In fact, people who like the game, that's something that they single out about it, is that you do not have to be a great illustrator to be able to competitively play this game. Now, the designer here is Eric Slauson. He also designed the original game. This whole franchise is kind of his baby. If I tell you about the games that he designed in the past, those are going to be MonsDRAWsity and Tattoo Stories. What makes this a little bit unique is that he had help from the guys at Shut Up and Sit Down, which is a very popular board game review channel. And so I believe that the two guys from Shut Up and Sit Down who really helped with this are Quinn Smith and Matt Lees, but I'm not going to list them as co-designers. I'm just going to have Eric here listed as the designer because I'm not entirely sure who from Shut Up and Sit Down had how much input or who else was involved. I think that's only going to make this version of the game better. Now, as for artists on MonsDRAWsity Unusual Suspects, I know there are at least 15 different artists. They are listed in the Kickstarter page. As a result of that, there's just too many artists, I think, for me to talk about. So we're just going to call it various. But if you want to take a look and see all of the various artists who are drawing crazy, Monsters University type characters, go look at the campaign page. One last thing, whenever I'm talking about these games, I always have the links to the campaigns down in the description. So if you are interested in a game that I'm talking about and you want to go check out the Kickstarter and possibly back it, just go down into the description section, click on the link, it'll take you over there. You can get more information and you can pledge if you'd like. Finally, MonsDRAWsity Unusual Suspects is published by Deepwater Games. And in the past, they have published Fantastic Factories, Hanamakoji, and Welcome To. Finally, let's talk about pledge levels. Now, a few caveats here as well. I do not list the kind of $1 or $5 pledges just to get Pledge Manager access. I do not talk about pledge levels for print and plays. I also, on the other side, do not talk about group pledges or retailer pledges. And if there are pledges that are kind of vanity pledges that are for items that are in a very small amount, like 3 things or 10 things, I don't include those either. So pledges have to have at least 100 units for me to talk about them here. So for the average consumer who's wanting to buy one version or one copy of the game, there are 4 different pledge levels that you may want to consider. For $29, you can pledge the I Want to Believe pledge level. So I think somebody over there is a fan of the X-Files. And that's going to get you the MonsDRAWsity Unusual Suspects base game, all of the unlocked promo cards, the technically difficult event deck, and the Bring Your Kids to Work deck. For $55, you can pledge at the Everything New pledge level. It's going to include everything from the previous pledge level, as well as the Best of the Bestiary expansion, the Back for More expansion, the Science Refresh Pack, and the Terrorsaurus Refresh Pack. For $79, you can pledge at the ET Extras Terrestrials pledge level. And that's going to include everything from the 2 previous pledge levels, plus the Cute Creatures expansion, the Robots expansion, and the monsters from the first base game. Now that's just a deck of 100 cards, so it's not the whole base game, but you will be getting most of the cards from that base game. So it's kind of like you're getting the content without getting the full version of the game, because you don't really need the full base game to play the cards since you already have the components in this version. But if you do want the original base game in full, you can pledge at the 129 Most Interested Backers pledge level. And that's going to include everything that we've talked about previously, plus the Mothman enamel pin, a monster sticker sheet, a t-shirt. So you're kind of getting a bunch of things that aren't really gameplay related. They're just extras. But then on top of that, you're going to get the MonsDRAWsity base game, and you'll be getting that in place of the 100 cards. So you won't need those 100 cards from the base game because you'll be getting the entire original base game. And a coloring book. And then finally, Deepwater Games is aiming to deliver MonsDRAWsity Unusual Suspects in June of 2022. Now our other Kickstarter this week is Honey Buzz Fall Flavors, and that one's going to complete its funding on Wednesday, November 24th, so the day before Thanksgiving. They had a minimum required funding goal of $20,000, and they're currently sitting around $185,000, which is more than 9 times that minimum required funding goal. Now, this is a game for 1 to 4 players. It plays in about 40 to 80 minutes. It is a medium-heavy game, and we are again going to set the risk for this campaign at medium-low. Now, Honey Buzz is essentially a worker placement game. uses bees, so it's very thematic. It has some nice components, especially if you get the deluxe stuff. And players also are going to be drafting tiles, which they will use to take actions. Now, unlike MonsDRAWsity Unusual Suspects, that was a standalone expansion. This is an expansion as well, but this is an expansion for Honey Buzz. So you do need the base game to play this. This is going to supplement and add on to the base game. It does not stand alone. Now, just as with the base game though, the designer here is Paul Salomon, and he has previously designed Genotype, a Mendelian genetics game, Honey Buzz, and Periodic, a game of the elements. And just as with the base game, we have the same artist. Her name is Anne Heedseek, and she has previously worked on Honey Buzz, Majesty for the Realm, When I Dream, and Welcome To. And Honey Buzz is being published by Elf Creek Games. They have previously published Atlantis Rising 2nd Edition, Honey Buzz, and Merchants of the Dark Road, which is a Kickstarter I'm actually anticipating after having backed it. It looks really great. Now we have 3 different pledge levels that we're going to talk about, as well as 3 add-ons. So the first of the pledge levels is for $29. It's called Fall Flavors Standard Edition. That's going to get you the standard edition of the game, as well as the Fall Cornucopia promo box. For $59, you can get Fall Flavors Deluxe Edition. So you'll be getting the Deluxe Edition of the game and the Fall Cornucopia promo box. Now, what comes in that Deluxe Edition is that you're going to get alternate box art along with a sleeve. The tiles in this deluxe version are going to be embossed, metal foil stamped, and the tokens are going to be upgraded from the punchboard version in the standard edition to acrylic. There are also, I think, 13 nectar caps and 2 wooden markers, and those will be upgraded as well. And then finally, for $179, you can get the deluxe all-in, and that's going to include everything deluxe for Fall Flavors, as well as the deluxe version of the original game, wooden coins, the Honey Pot mini expansion, and the fall color player pieces, which will give you different color pieces that kind of match fall, autumn. Now, the 3 add-ons that you can buy separately, you can buy those fall color player pieces for $25. You can also get the standard edition of the base game for $50, and the deluxe version of the base game for $70. So if you don't want completely everything, you can choose what you want for the new expansion, Fall Flavors, and then you can add in some extra things if you still want to get some version of the base game, maybe those, alternate player colors. And then finally, Elf Creek Games is looking to deliver Honey Buzz Fall Flavors in November of 2022. I do have one new acquisition this period, and that is Role Player Adventures. So I received the Kickstarter. I'm really excited about it. I see people are playing it already and having a really good time with it. In my mind, it kind of bears some comparison to Dice Throne Adventures, because that is another game that took a standalone game where players were kind of competing against each other and brought them together into a dungeon crawler. So I'm really looking forward to Role Player Adventures. I don't know when I'll get it to the table. It's also a big game. I think in terms of scope and things like that, it's also physically a big game. So I do look forward to getting my taste of it, and I'll probably do that maybe over Thanksgiving or the week after. But that game in full is something that I'm hoping to play next year when we launch the Twitch channel and we're eventually playing campaign games live. And that's something that I'm very much looking forward to. Now, before I wrap this video, I'd like to do a quick what's coming. So I still do have a Dinosaur World First Impressions video that I plan on getting out this week. I'm going to try to get that filmed and edited tomorrow on Friday. I will not be available all weekend, Saturday or Sunday, and then much of next week I will not be available either. We're doing some things for Thanksgiving. So I don't want to talk about videos beyond that because I probably won't be recording much or posting much until after Thanksgiving. So I will be doing a Kickstarter Weekly next week. It'll probably get put out at the end of the weekend or possibly even Monday. We're talking after Thanksgiving weekend. And in that, I'll be talking about what else is coming in terms of future videos. I did want to address the fact that this video today I changed the format a little bit and I talked about the played games first. So in the past, I've been talking about the currently running Kickstarter campaigns first, and then talking about the games that I pledged from the previous week. This week there were none, so I didn't pledge anything from the games that I talked about last week. And then I'll usually talk about acquired games, and then the last thing I'll talk about is played games. But I don't really think there's that much for me to talk about with both pledged games or acquired games. So I think it makes sense to push both of those towards the end of the video. And I want to get the played games right up front because I think that's content that people may be interested in. So for now, I think through the end of the year, I'm going to experiment with talking about the played games first, followed by the currently running Kickstarters. And then if people kind of want to peace out, they can stop watching the video there. If you want a little more information, you can stay tuned. You'll be able to listen to the games that I personally pledged, as well as the games that I have brought into my collection, which usually indicates the games that I'm going to be making content for in the near future. And then, of course, the What's Coming section, where I talk about what's coming both in terms of videos and also changes for the channel, the Think Outside the Board website, and eventually for the Patreon and the Twitch channel. So one last little thing. Right now, while I am planning on doing, the played game section first and the currently running Kickstarter second and seeing how that goes for the rest of the year, I am also very much entertaining the idea of splitting these videos in half. And so one would be the Kickstarter Weekly, and that video would continue to cover currently running Kickstarters plus the games that I pledged. And then I would do a second video, and that video would be the games that I've played and the games that I've acquired. So I'm kind of just splitting the Kickstarter Weekly in half. One half would stay the Kickstarter Weekly, the other half would become, Played Games Weekly or something like that. I think having two different videos in a more consumable size may help. So please, as the next month goes on, let me know what you think. Let me know what you think about me doing the played games first and then the Kickstarters versus me splitting those into two videos. I'm probably going to try to make it the rest of this year through the month of December doing it this way just to see how it goes. But I think that there could be huge advantages towards splitting it in half, because if there's a week where there are a lot of Kickstarters, it would mean that I could get that video shot and edited and not also be worrying about the games that I played at the same time, which means that the Kickstarter weeklies may be easier to get out on a very timely basis. And then I could use a different day of the week, maybe Monday or something, to do the played games that week. The Kickstarter Weekly would probably be coming out on Thursday or Friday very consistently and very reliably. And then the played games video would come out like Monday or Tuesday. So it'd be kind of staggered throughout the week. So be looking out for all that. Catch my Dinosaur World First Impressions video next week if that's something that appeals to you. Come back at the end of Thanksgiving to see my next Kickstarter Weekly, which will have a lot of stuff, both played games and currently running Kickstarters, and then probably a lot of announcements about what games I'm going to be producing content for. Thank you for your time, which is the best way to support this channel right now. I very much appreciate it, and I'll see you soon with more content. Take care.